28, 35, 50, 85. They're all focal lengths, but they're also keys, each one unlocking a different door to a different space, to a different way of seeing. TTArtisan sent me this lens for review. This video is not sponsored, all opinions are my own, and TTArtisan had no input in the video or its publication. It's only been a week or so since we talked about the meaning of a lens, and more specifically, the meaning of different focal lengths in photography. A 35mm lens wants you to go closer. It demands that you feel the scene, that you step into it, that you become part of what's happening in front of you. A 50mm, on the other hand, allows you to stay a little further back. It gives you the space to observe, to react without the pressure of the moment, without being pulled by its energy. It allows you to be more deliberate, more subjective. The author of the story you are writing with light as ink, and your lens and camera as the pen. And for me, that's the power of the 50mm. Just like in writing, not all pens are the same. Some have sharp edges and produce thinner lines, while others are bolder, leaving heavier marks on the page. Some are made of plastic and feel light in the hand, while others are metal, heavier and more taxing on the thumb. In every case though, the purpose is the same. You use them to write. And what matters most isn't how the letters look, but what you're actually writing. Still, the pen you choose can matter. Sometimes you love the feel of it in your hands, the way its tip glides across the paper, the way ink slowly marks the page and turns thoughts into words. And that feeling, that connection to the tool, often makes you want to write more. Lenses work in much the same way. Any lens can capture an image, but each one of them does it slightly differently, even if the focal lengths are the same. And just like writing, loving the tool often leads to loving the process. And that's where the TTArtisan 35mm f1.8 comes in. A 35mm lens that on my Fuji X-T5 gives me a field of view closer to that of a 50mm. From the moment you mount it on the camera, it's a lens you notice. Its exterior is unlike any other lens in this category. The smooth finish, the orange body, the red focus ring give your eyes and your hands a different experience before you've even taken a photo. The same applies to the lens hood, the same color and a shape that is reminiscent to older lenses. It's a strange mix of legacy and modern design, something that will work for some and maybe not for others. But we're here to talk about my own experience, and in that space, the way this lens looks worked for me. I'm not here to talk about specs. That was never my intention for this channel, and it has never been my focus. I firmly believe that a great photograph can be taken with any tool. That's why I'm here for a different reason, to talk about what this lens can do in my hands and how it felt to use it. For me, that's a far more valuable exercise than reading through a sheet of specs. So I spent almost a month with this lens mounted on my camera. When I'm testing a lens, that's how I like to do it. No obstructions, no switching back and forth, just committing to the lens in question. Also, one photo walk is never enough to adapt to how a lens is, or to learn how to bring the best out of it. The same applies to the shooting conditions. That's why I decided to take it out on a rather gloomy day, a cloudy morning with occasional moments where the sun would break through. There was no plan for this photo walk. I wanted to experience the lens in the most honest way possible, to go out and photograph whatever came in front of me, freely and without restrictions. As we've already talked about, the 50mm allows you to stay a little further back while still keeping you engaged with the scene. That was exactly what I was looking for. Moments, people interacting, gestures, individuals existing within and shaped by their environment. At one point I came across a scene that felt like a real test for the autofocus. As I walked past a restaurant, I noticed people eating and being framed by these beautiful red and white shapes on the glass. At the same time, there was a strong reflection from the building behind me layered over the scene. The question was simple: would the autofocus be able to focus on the people inside rather than the reflections on the glass? So, shooting at f4.5 and using spot autofocus, I had no issues to capture the people in focus. The same applied to this second image, which ended up being one of the highlights for me. I went down Trinity Lane, a classic spot in Cambridge, which becomes even more interesting after rain when puddles start forming on the ground. I leaned down and placed my camera very close to the water to capture the reflections while focusing on the man who was walking down the lane. Once again, the camera lens combination was able to focus accurately. But did it work perfectly every time? I wouldn't say that it did, but that has largely been my experience when shooting with the X-T5. What I can say though is that it performed better than many other lenses I've used on the system, and overall the autofocus performance was more than acceptable for the kind of photography I do. If you're enjoying this video, hit the like button and consider subscribing with the bell. But there is another very important thing we need to discuss. How was the overall image quality? It feels like we stress a lot about image quality. Most discussions around lenses and cameras online seem to revolve around sharpness, how sharp a lens is, but also how much distortion and vignetting it has. And you know what? I think that's fair. We spend our hard-earned money and we want the best possible value in return. And of course, those who work professionally rather than treating photography as a weekend endeavor, delivering the highest possible quality to their clients is of top priority, and this is absolutely understandable. And then there is me, and many others like me, who will notice sharpness, distortion and vignetting, but they will find themselves asking a different question. Does the feel, the character I get from this lens matches the way I want to express myself in the photographs? My style tends to be on the gloomy side. I often call it dark or cinematic, simply because it makes it easier to describe. Within that style, I usually look for gear with character. Sometimes character means sharpness. Other times means something that I can't quite explain. It's more similar to a feeling. And I think this lens gave that feeling to my photos. There is a balance here between sharpness and softness. When shooting wide open, there is a slight vignetting, which I personally exaggerate further in post-production, as you can see in these images. But I'm using it to guide the viewer's eye, to pull them closer, deeper into the scene and towards the subject. On the X-T5, that feeling came through clearly. It worked in softer, low-contrast scenes, like one where a woman walks to the frame in a long white dress, her heels cutting through the street under a pale blue sky with birds dancing above her head. But it also held up in high-contrast situations. In one scene, the sun burned through the frame, reflecting off the wet ground and pushing people into silhouettes, almost dissolving them into the light. In that moment, lens flare was present, but not strong enough to become a problem. A few days later in London, shooting against an even brighter sun, lens flare became a much stronger feature of the image. I've said this about other lenses before, but for me, this kind of lens flare is something I actively look for in scenes like that. I find it adds to the abstract, deep and dark emotions I want to convey, but if this is something that you will enjoy or not, I think this is entirely up to you. When we hear f1.8 on a lens, two things come to mind. One is low light performance and the second is bokeh. I didn't deliberately use this lens for portraits or chasing bokeh during my testing, although moments like that naturally appeared, as you would expect from a lens with this aperture and this focal length. What I enjoyed most wasn't just the bokeh itself, but the subject separation, what we often describe as 3D pop. That was especially noticeable in scenes where rim light helped define the subject. In one example, a woman wearing a purple coat is walking away from me while smoking. Even at a relatively longer distance, the separation between her and the background was clear. The subject stood out naturally without feeling forced or exaggerated. The same applied to another scene in London. This time I was closer to the subject, and even though I was shooting at f3.6, the subject to background separation remained smooth and pleasing. There was a real sense of depth that helped the image breathe. I noticed the same behavior in scenes where I deliberately blurred the foreground while keeping the background in focus. The transition from sharpness to blur felt natural and unobstructive. What I liked about the blur coming from this lens wasn't that it was particularly unique or attention-grabbing, but how well it supported the subject. And at night, it kept on performing. Colors were rendered nicely, contrast was well controlled, and I didn't run into any flaring issues from common street lamps. The f1.8 aperture was more than enough to capture clean night scenes, keeping in mind that in terms of depth of field and light gathering, it behaves closer to that of f2.8 on a full frame. So, who is this lens for? I think this lens is for photographers who care more about the process rather than the promise of perfection. For people who want a lens with character, a character that matches their own colorful soul, but that also knows when to step aside and let them focus on seeing, timing, and composition rather than chasing technical excellence for its own sake. It's for those who enjoy walking the streets without a plan and reacting to the moments as they unfold. For photographers who like being close enough to feel the scene, but still far enough to observe it. It's also a good fit for anyone who values simplicity. The TTArtisan 35mm f1.8 doesn't try to impress you with extreme specs. It doesn't even have weather sealing. Instead, it invites you to slow down, to feel the process, to enjoy it, and to be present. And for many photographers, especially those who are learning, refining, and rediscovering their way of seeing, with a touch of wildness in them, that's incredibly valuable. In fact, exactly as a fellow photographer said to me when he saw me shooting with this lens on the streets, this lens is wild. It didn't change the way I photograph by any means, but it danced with it, cheek to cheek. And it reminded me that gear doesn't make the photograph. People do. And sometimes a simple budget lens like this one, around $140, with plenty of character and pleasing image rendering, is all you need to reconnect with why you picked up a camera in the first place. So what do you think? Do you like this lens? How it looks and how it shoots? Would you use it? Let me know down in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button, the new hype button, consider subscribing with the bell, or become a member to support the work behind these films. And if you want to see the real difference between the 35mm focal length and the 50mm, click and watch this video next. That was all for today, guys. Thank you very much for watching. Until next time, I will see you on the streets. Bye bye.